and welcome back. Before I begin, I have some new subscribers to thank. Band Cosmetic Animal Testing, WB Mac 1958, Polish Bookish, and last but not least, Chris, who is my friend in real life so I can have a little fun with his username. Thank you all so much for subscribing. I really appreciate it. And now, on with the haul. This is, believe it or not, going to be my first ever collective book haul. The first part is going to be a haul from the book thing, and then the second part is going to be a haul from the Enoch Pratt Free Library annual book sale, which I attended earlier this month. And so first up, this is my usual haul from the Book Thing of Baltimore, a wonderful nonprofit that gives out free books every weekend and also accepts donations of unwanted books. And you can find out more about them at www.bookthing.org. And forgive me if I'm a little stiff. I just got home from the book thing and it is just a freezing cold wind out there, and so my lips are a little bit like sort of puffy and stiff. So forgive me if my elocution is not quite up to its usual standards. First, I got The Ethics of Spinoza. I read one work of Spinoza's years and years ago. I can't remember if it was a political treatise or a theological political treatise, because he's written both. Don't remember much about it. I think I was like 11 or 12 at the time, perhaps a little under his intended demographic. But this is his best known work, and I feel like I should give it a try. And then I got a couple of novels by Anthony Burgess. I think I got The Doctor is Sick a couple of months ago maybe, and I had mentioned that I had read only A Clockwork Orange at that point, but was curious about exploring his work further. And since then, I have read his novel Earthly Powers, which is one of his later novels, and I actually had an excuse to read it for work because Europa Editions just put out a reissue of it, and I quite enjoyed that. So I got a couple more of his books, Tremor of Intent and Napoleon Symphony. And then, this is a testament to my probably futile ambitions, but I got Russian Stories, Ruski Raskazi, a Bantam dual language book. I studied Russian in high school, and for one semester at college, until I realized that the only levels they went up to in college were basically the level I got to in high school, and there wasn't really much point, and I had this course on the American West I wanted to take, and whatever. So I have sort of a beginner's grasp of Russian. I mean, if I see words on the page, I can sound them out, and I don't know, I have an okay vocabulary and I understand some of the grammar, but I unfortunately never really got my Russian skills up to the point where I could read in Russian. I read literature in Russian, which is something I've always regretted. But I got this handy dual language book, so maybe in all the infinite spare time I have, I will be able to read some of these stories in English and Russian and improve my language skills a little bit. But not sure if that's going to happen, but we shall see. Hope springs eternal. And then I got The Lonely Passion of Judith Hearn by Brian Moore. And this is exciting because this is one of these lovely NYRB Classics editions. Brian Moore is one of those authors I've heard of, have never tried before. This particular book sounds really good. I feel a little guilty about picking it up because I have another one of his novels called Cold Heaven, which I haven't read yet. And I was interested in that one because I really liked the film adaptation by Nicholas Roeg. But this one is so famous, sounds really good, and it's an NYRB edition, and I just couldn't resist. Then I picked up The Mezzanine by Nicholson Baker. Really excited about this because it is a vintage contemporaries edition, although not one of the really old school ones, which you often see behind me, which have the white lettering on the author's name instead of the black lettering, but it's okay. Baker is probably most infamous for his novel Vox, which is basically a book-length phone sex episode, I believe. I haven't read it. And the only one of his books I read was Checkpoint, which I thought was had a couple of interesting moments, but was overall kind of self-indulgent and vapid. But this one sounds kind of interesting, so we shall see. And then finally, you may remember I think I had a conversation with one of my subscribers. I think it was Ella5452 um, on a haul video I did from, I guess, the last Pratt book sale I went to, where I picked up Stephen King's Pet Sematary. And I was talking about how I'd had this really mixed relationship with Stephen King, and how I didn't really, a lot of his work I thought had great potential, couldn't get past the style, etc., etc. But Pet Sematary I wound up really liking, and I decided the next one of his I wanted to try was Salem's Lot. And finally, this is like a year later, I found Salem's Lot at the book thing. So we shall see if this one is any good. And then, you may remember in my last haul, I picked up The Honorable Schoolboy, which was the third book in John le Carré's George Smiley trilogy, which I'd heard was so good. And I was complaining about how I always seem to find these third books in trilogies. I can never find the first one. Well, this time I found Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, which is the first book in the trilogy. So I am excited. Yay! And then I got A Spy in Winter by Michael Hastings. The only reason I really picked this up was I need to look this up when I'm finished, but I think Michael Hastings is the guy who wrote that infamous Rolling Stone story about General McChrystal, the one that got him fired. McChrystal, not Hastings. And so I was just sort of curious what kind of a spy novel that journalist would write. So if this is not the Michael Hastings, I may wind up just taking this back, but we shall see. And I was really excited to find this. This is Tapping the Source by Kem Nunn. Kem Nunn writes surfer noir, and this is his first book, or the first novel in his surfer noir series. Just, how can you resist surfer noir? And I was excited to find this. This is Capital by John Lanchester. This is actually an advanced reading copy, or galley, of Capital, which came out in hardback. Well, actually, this says when it's coming out. It came out in June, apparently, in hardback. We've had it at the bookstore. It's been a pretty good seller, and it looked really interesting, but I just, haven't read it. And so I will try to give this a read before it comes out into paperback, so I can be pretty knowledgeable. And then I got this novel, White Jazz by Charles Newman. I don't really know anything about it. It just sounded kind of interesting. It's one of these dissolute yuppie, living his life, oh, what is going to become of him stories. Not to be confused with James Ellroy's White Jazz. And then I've got The Dialectic of Sex, The Case for Feminist Revolution by Shulamith Firestone. Shulamith Firestone is probably the most radical of the well-known second-wave feminists. Haven't read anything by her, but I figured I should give it a try. And here's a little tidbit. I was looking for in the novel I'm writing, I was looking for any name for one of the main character's sisters. And I was working at the Pratt at the time, and I was doing my work sorting through library discards to see if they'd be suitable for the book sale, or if they were in such horrible condition that you just had to get rid of them. So in the process of doing that, I would flip through them, make sure the pages were clean and all that. And I just came across something by Shulamith Firestone. I was like, all right, his sister's going to be named Shulamith, and that was that. So I feel like I at least owe it to her to read something of hers. And then I got a few books that are frankly a little bit junky looking, but I just figured New Year's is coming up, I'm going to have a day off, I'll just page through them and, skim through them, have a little fun. This is Pink Collar Workers, Inside the World of Women's Work by Louise Cat Powell. Robert Half on Hiring by Robert Half. Fun little trivia about me. My corporate hell years, all three of them were spent working for a competitor of Robert Half's, so I'm sort of curious what Robert Half himself has to say about hiring, or had to say about it back whenever this was written. It's written in 1985, the year I was born. That's interesting. Then Working Wounded, Advice That Adds Insight to Injury by Bob Rossner. And this is probably the junkiest. I'm almost embarrassed to show this, but here goes. This is Confessions of a Prep School Mommy Handler, a memoir by Wade Rouse. And that is all for the section, for the book thing section of the hall. And now I'm going to move on to the Pratt Library book sale section. I was actually pretty abstemious this time around at the Pratt Library sale, partly because I went on Sunday and they were pretty much cleaned out, but and because I was buying a lot of music on vinyl, and that's really heavy to carry, so I was trying to lighten up my book load a little bit. But I got some really cool things. I got Alexandre Dumas' En Russie in 3 volumes about his travels in Russia, and I'm assuming this is Alexandre Dumas Père. And you can see they're bound really, this is a really old book, and they're bound really beautifully as well. And I got Millennium Hall by Sarah Scott. This is a feminist novel from the 18th century, which is one of my favorite literary centuries. I sort of feel like sometimes everything was downhill after that, although there are plenty of later writers I enjoy. And this is the one of those Virago Classics books, so of course I had to grab that. And then I got The Rose and the Key by J. Sheridan Le Fanu. I've read only 2 stories by Le Fanu. One was Carmilla, which is such a great story. I think along with Susie McKee Charnis's The Vampire Tapestry, it's probably one of the 2 best vampire stories ever written, in my opinion. Although I haven't read a ton of vampire stuff, but just really well done with great psychological insight. And then the other story of his, I always forget the title, but fortunately, I have the book it's in right here. I don't know if this is still in print, but the Oxford Book of Victorian Ghost Stories is a great, great anthology. But the story is called An Account of Some Strange Disturbances in Angier Street. Really great story and just terrifying. Scared the living daylights out of me. So anyway, Le Fanu, really excited to read more by him. And last but not least, I was so incredibly excited to find this, and you're going to laugh when you find out what it is, but it is Every Night Josephine by Jacqueline Suzanne. I'm a huge Jacqueline Suzanne fan. I feel like, frankly, if she'd been a man, she would have probably at least the stature that Norman Mailer has now. And I'm not knocking Norman Mailer. I think I've enjoyed some of his work, but I mean, this very kind of over-the-top material, but done with such verve and swagger that you can't help but just sit and be like, wow. Once Is Not Enough is probably one of my all-time favorite books. Just great, great book. The movie is good too, but very different from the book. And Valley of the Dolls was the first of hers I read when I think I was about 13. Really liked that as well. Movie, really bad. But, I mean, she writes about, there's a lot of sort of glamour and sex and drugs and whatnot, but basically her subject matter is the way women delude themselves and the traps they fall into, and just, she's a great writer. I love her. Although frankly, unless you're a hardcore fan, you could probably skip Dolores and Yargo. And The Love Machine is sort of in the middle. It's not great, but it's certainly not bad either. But anyway, this is the one book of hers I haven't read, and it is her memoir about her little dog. So I'm really, really excited for this. And if you've made it this far, thanks for watching, and I hope you'll join me for my next video.